We're going to prayer by the chaplain.
I'm going to start with the short story and then close with the prayer. The story is about a couple birds that lived in this town called Wington. And I think it's up north, up in Dave Dill's district, but I'm not sure. And these two birds, one of them was Sammy Sparrow, and it was his birthday was coming up, and so he was discussing with his mother who he was going to invite to his birthday party. And he kept saying, I don't want to invite Chucky Crossbill to my party. And his mother kept insisting no, and finally she just had to put her claws down and say, no, if you don't invite Chucky Crossbill to your party, you don't get to have a party. So finally he goes, oh, all right, fine, Mom, if that's what we have to do. So the day of the big party came, and all the little birds got together, and they went to the big skiing hill, and they flew up to the top, and they skied down to the bottom, and they fly back up and forth all day. They were just having a great time skiing on this big hill. They didn't even notice that this big storm was coming in, and it was snowing harder and harder, and the wind was starting to blow. And finally, about 3 or 4 o'clock, somebody said, I think we better all get home. And Sammy Sparrow said, okay, but one more time down the hill. So he went up to the top of the hill, and on his way down, don't you know it, he ran into a tree and broke one of his wings and both of his legs. Poor little sparrow there all by himself. So all of the other little birds, he said, you guys got to get home before the storm gets worse, and I'll be fine. I'll make it through this storm by myself right here. And all the other birds took off except Chucky Crossbill. He said, I won't leave him. I'm staying here with you because this storm could last several days. We don't know. So Chucky Crossbill wouldn't leave, and he finally helped Sammy Sparrow get into the bottom of a little pine tree that had a little opening in it. And they crawled in there and got out of the storm and started to warm up a little bit because, they were out of the wind and the snow wasn't hitting them, so they started to dry off a little bit. But the storm raged on for several days, and after a little while, Sammy Sparrow was starting to get hungry, and he's going, boy, I don't know how much longer I can go. Well, here there was, inside that little hole was, in this pine tree, were some pine cones. And Chucky Crossbill said, oh, we can eat those pine cones. And Sammy Sparrow said, no, we can't get those. And Chucky Crossbill said, oh, yeah, there's little pine seeds in there, and we can eat them. But Sammy Sparrow said, but we can't get them out. And Chucky Crossbill said, oh, watch this. And he put one in his beak. And you see, a crossbill, their beak goes like that instead of like most birds. It is straight. And because of that, he was able to put those pine cones in there and just that quick, just flip them and the seeds just fell out. So they both were able to eat all they wanted to eat that night. And the next day, and the next day. And so, because Chucky Crossbill was different, he saved Sammy Sparrow's life. And it was because he was different, because of his crossed bill, that Sammy didn't want him to come in the first place. God has made all of us different. And thank God there is nobody like any else in the world like each of us. That's a good thing. So let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for making us unique. Help us appreciate that diversity that we have. Amen.
The chaplain for today is our own Reverend and Representative Tim Faust from Hinckley, Minnesota. We're going to Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will take the roll. clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 88th Session, 2014, 88th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Tuesday, April 22nd, 2014.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved and as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there is no objection, and the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File 2031. Say second reading.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2265.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2491.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2543.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2949.
Introduction of bills. Okay. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading of Senate File 1689.
Second reading of Senate files. Is that it? Okay. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 3354 and 3355.
First reading, House Files 354 and 2355.
It is a little bit. I probably need one of those, though. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor to inform the House of Representatives that the Senate is ready to meet with the House for joint convention on Wednesday, April 30th, 2014, to receive the message of the Honorable Mark Dayton, Governor of the State of Minnesota. Signed, Joanne M. Zob. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate Files 1246 and 2466. This is the Mariani message. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2397, an act relating to education. Mariani moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2397, that the Speaker appoint a committee of 5 members of the House, and that the House requests that a like committee be appointed by the Senate.
Representative Mariani.
Speaker, members, this is the omnibus K-12 policy bill. Both bills have a lot of similarities, but obviously there's some differences. And so we want to go to conference and resolve those. We hope to be able to do those pretty efficiently. Would appreciate your support.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. First reading of Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2146, an act relating to public safety. Rosenthal moves that Senate File 1246, House File 1335, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
If without objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2466, an act relating to public safety. Atkins moves that House File 2466 and Senate File 2288, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Without objection, so ordered. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 474. Holberg, Lesh, and Hilstrom. Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File 2397. Mariani, Breinart, Yaruso, Swatsky, and Erdahl. That's it.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 892. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 892 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Representative Melin.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I have before you House File 892, the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act, which improves the international recognition and enforcement of Minnesota child support orders. And although the United States routinely enforces child support orders issued by foreign jurisdictions, unfortunately that reciprocity is often lacking when cases originated in the United States are reviewed abroad. Because of that, in November of 2007, the United States signed the Hague Convention on the International Recovery of Child Support, and to provide recognition for the approximately 150,000 international child support cases that currently involve a party that's living in the United States. House File 892 amends the Uniform Act by establishing uniform procedures for processing international child support cases. Again, members, this just makes it easier to enforce Minnesota child support cases abroad. As many of you know, we sometimes do these on an individual country-by-country basis. I think Representative Hoppe had a bill a couple years ago regarding that, and this is just to bring more uniformity to our laws. It does require congressional action, so we're not positive when that's going to happen, but hopefully soon. I would ask for members' support. Thank you.
There's no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 892.
Third reading. Any discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Falk votes aye. There being 129 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 685. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 685, unofficially engrossed and reprinted for the House to include committee amendments, an act relating to civil commitment.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, we've all seen the newspaper articles that talk about folks who are suffering from mental illness languishing in our jails. This bill is an attempt to take care of part of that issue. Members, currently someone needs to go through a competency exam to find out if they're competent to stand trial, and then after there would be an exam to find out if they were criminally responsible. This bill would allow that process to happen at the same time. And that does two things. One, it speeds up the process. And two, it makes the person who currently is not entitled to a lawyer during the competency period eligible for a lawyer during that time. Members, all sides have gotten together and agreed on this. The only time this dual tracking would happen is when all parties agree. So the defense attorney would agree, the prosecutor would agree, everyone would agree that it was in the best interest of the person. So members, I ask for your support.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 685.
Third reading. Any further discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Representative Hausman votes aye. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2668. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2668, the first engrossment, an act relating to courts.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, this bill was brought to us by the judicial branch, and it's really about making the court more efficient. It requires some additional information on the submission of judges to protect individuals who apply for a transfer of structured settlement. It also provides in a temporary restraining order that the hearing must be made within 20 days after the person is served on the restraining order. And it makes some clarifying changes now that e-court is going to be requiring e-filing to actually make the process work. Members, it removes some requirements that pleadings and affidavits be signed by a notary, because when they're electronically filed, that's really not possible. And so finally, the objective is really to gain efficiency in cases that are handled. This has been non-controversial and all sides have agreed up to this point. Mr. Speaker, I do have an amendment at the desk.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hilstrom moving to amend House File 2668, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 1099.
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, the A14 amendment is really part of a court reporter bill that we heard in our committee that was controversial. The two pieces that we're bringing back forward are the parts that were not controversial. The more controversial bill is sitting in the Rules Committee, and we won't be bringing that up anymore this year. And so we just really need the pieces that require a court reporter fee schedule to be disclosed, and what the consequence is if you don't follow it. So members, I ask that you support this amendment. This, again, is the non-controversial pieces.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Jaskowski moving to amend the Hilstrom amendment to House File 2668 as follows. The amendment is coded A6.
Representative Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hilstrom, for bringing the bill and the amendment. The amendment to the amendment provides the opportunity, the authorization, if you will, for courtrooms to monitor courtroom proceedings using electronic monitoring through pilot projects. The amendment asks the court to report to the legislature by January 15th of 2016 on any courtroom electronic monitoring pilot projects that they happen to decide to engage in. Much of the underlying bill that we have before us here today is designed to remove barriers to implementing the e-court MN initiatives, and this particular amendment works to extend that to provide additional efforts to properly use technology to extend our efforts in the courtroom. This amendment is a good parallel and a good fit that way. Hennepin County, members, is currently implementing remote electronic courtroom monitoring successfully. A court reporter in Hennepin County is in a room where he or she electronically monitors 4 different courtrooms at the same time, thereby saving time and personnel costs for the courts. This amendment allows for the savings that are achieved through this leveraging of electronic courtroom monitoring to be directed to the Supreme Court's Legal Services Division for legal representation of low-income clients in family law matters. So it realizes that there's going to be savings actualized through the implementation of electronic monitoring, and those savings, members, then in the amendment are used to help low-income people represent themselves or be represented in court proceedings. Members, I would appreciate your support of the amendment, and Mr. Speaker, ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, we moved away from county court system and went to a state court system. We want the state system to function as a state court, not as individual county courts. The court system has started implementing technology, but not all areas has the ability to implement technology nor the finances. So while I think that looking at this piece deserves some consideration, it really should go through the committee process. Mr. Speaker, I really think that, members, I would encourage you to vote no on this provision. We really need to study what it is that happens when you implement with technology across the state. And we don't want people who don't have access to broadband in some areas of the state to have less court fairness than other places. So, Mr. Speaker, I really think that we need a state system. We need the court to implement the use of technology best to make sure that all of our court hearings all across the state are administered in a fair manner. I'd ask members to vote no.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, we have another bill coming before us that I assume this body is going to pass. It's House File 2295 that allows for GPS monitoring district by district and allowing those districts to do that. This provides simply the ability for those districts to decide whether this electronic monitoring is right for them, whether it would be a cost-saving measure, and provides them that authority. So I encourage your support for the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 71 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. On the Hilstrom amendment, any further discussion? Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order. Under House Rules Section 3.21, our House rules say that motions and propositions must be germane to the underlying bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm ready for advice if you would like.
Yeah, please state your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, this particular amendment before us amends Sections 6 and 7 of Representative Hilstrom's House File 2455. It's a court reporter's bill, and it's in Chapter 486 of Minnesota statutes. House File 2668 is the Minnesota Judicial Branch's policy initiative. It amends sections in these following chapters of Minnesota statutes: Chapter 204B, Chapter 358, Chapter 359, Chapter 524, Chapter 549, Chapter 600, Chapter 609, Chapter 611A, and Chapter 645. Members, those are the chapters that the bill amends, that are mentioned in the bill. The closest chapter to the chapter mentioned in this amendment, members, is it's a full 36 chapters away from from those in the underlying bill. So the closest chapter in the underlying bill is chapter 524. This is chapter 486, and there's nowhere in the bill that contains this particular chapter. Not only does the bill not open chapter 486 at all, it doesn't open anything in, as I mentioned, chapters 480 to 494, the judiciary chapters, either. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is clearly not germane to the underlying bill, and Mr. Speaker, I ask you to rule in favor of the point of order.
Representative Hilstrom, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice?
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while those specific sites are not in this bill, that's correct. This bill is the omnibus court bill, the judicial branch bill, and it strives to make the court operate in a more efficient manner. Your Honor, Mr. Speaker.
That's all right.
Mr. Speaker, the process by which the court uses court reporters to make all of these other areas that are within this bill operate in a fashion which creates the record for the court. Your Honor, this too is been part of the court's initiatives to make certain that all of the processes within the court system are fair. Mr. Speaker, you have given great latitude in these omnibus bills when they relate to the same subject, and I would argue that they do in this case as well.
Representative Quam, what purpose do you rise?
For advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My advice is that, contrary to the previous advice, there hasn't been latitude in other omnibus bills for amendments that were not germane or pertinent to the chapters that were specifically addressed in the bill, and therefore consistency, I advise that you take the point well taken.
Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Representative Driscoll, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you. If I could just offer a bit more advice, Mr.
Sure.
Speaker.
Yes.
Just to kind of trigger your memory, Mr. Speaker, multiple times before this body, you have ruled amendments out of order that did not have reference in the amendment to chapters in the underlying bill. And that's exactly what we have here, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hilstrom, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will withdraw the A14 amendment.
Representative Hilstrom withdraws her amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will report will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2668.
Third reading. Further discussion of the bill. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1725. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1725, the second engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate File 1725 is an accreditation bill for forensic laboratories. This became an issue in 2012 when the St. Paul laboratory got into some trouble with tainted samples, and it caused thousands of samples to be re-examined and for some perpetrators to go free. This bill has been in the works for some time. We've been meeting over the interim with different stakeholders. It's supported by the St. Paul Police Department, the Minnesota Chiefs of Police, the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the Tri-County Regional Forensic Lab, which is Anoka, Sherburne, and Wright counties, the public defenders, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office Crime Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, this bill would put in a floor so we can be sure that our samples are correct and that nobody is getting set free because of mistakes that might be made in a laboratory. And I will sit and take questions on the bill. Thank you.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1725.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. Representative Zerbas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the author will yield for some questions.
He will yield. Representative Zerbas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rosenthal, I agree with the intent of the bill. I have some concerns about some unintended consequences around shifting some costs and expense back to local communities that I think the timeline is a little bit rushed. Could you walk through the timeline for the date they need to be applied for and accredited and kind of walk us through that portion?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Zerwas. This is supposed to be in place by January 2015, I believe, but if the lab is already working towards accreditation, there's a 1 to 3 year extension.
Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if the author will continue to yield.
He will. Representative Zerwas.
On page 2, line 2.28 to 2.31, it references laboratories that have begun or resumed operation after a hiatus on or after July 1st, 2011. Is there a specific lab that's in reference to?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Zerwas, I think it was the St. Paul lab.
Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's kind of what I assumed. And so I think it's frustrating, members, that this bill is here because of the St. Paul Crime Lab. And this shortened timetable for labs, I'm thinking about the St. Cloud Police Department that does some fingerprint work and some crime scene work. That would be impacted by this bill. Rochester, Mankato, Moorhead, Duluth Police Department that does some fingerprint work would be impacted by this bill in a very accelerated time frame. And so now all of these police departments are going to have to figure out how to get accredited in this shortened time frame. But the bad actor, they've been on hiatus or they've resumed. And so they get an extra few years. And so I think that is the trouble, and I think that's the concern. I think, again, it's St. Paul getting special treatment out of this bill, and I have some concerns about that. If the author would yield to another question.
He will. Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under subdivision 2 in section B, it talks about toxicology, trace evidence. In section C of subdivision 2, it talks about question documents and blood stain pattern analysis. I'm concerned about some labs that in some police departments where their deputies outside of the lab are conducting blood pattern stain analysis. And if you look at the first part of the bill, they're creating reports, they're coming to conclusion, they're providing expert witness testimony. I'm wondering if this would impact those labs to continue to provide that service.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Zerwas, if these labs are on the path for accreditation, they can continue on that path. If they are not, they can still continue to operate, but they will not be, won't have the opportunity to be as informed as some of the other accredited labs with better equipment and people that are trained to do the work. They can continue towards that. This doesn't require them to stop. It just outlines the path for accreditation.
Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the idea, though, Representative Rosenthal, is that the deputies that are performing some of this crime scene work are outside of a laboratory but doing the exact functions described within the bill. And so what I'm looking for clarity on is, are these folks covered under this bill, or are they exempted? How does this impact not a lab, but a deputy sheriff in Anoka County that goes to an assault, that's been trained in blood stain pattern analysis, and 6 months later will put out photos and diagrams, we'll have velocity of the blood stain, we'll talk about a fine mist that talks about the impact of the blow. Is that covered in your bill or not?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Zerwas, this bill only deals with lab accreditation. It does not deal with certification of people who might be doing as lab stains or on-the-scene crime recording, as in your question. So it does not affect them at all. It affects the lab itself.
Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, I have a few concerns. I think the point of this bill is right. I think the work being done by our crime labs across the state needs to come from an accredited lab. It needs to live up to the scientific muster. I think what happened in St. Paul is inexcusable. And what frustrates me is that there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences from small to mid-size law enforcement agencies that are currently doing one-off or small operation fingerprint comparisons. I worked for a sheriff's office before the Tri-County Lab, and we did fingerprint examinations. And what we did is we prevented thousands and thousands and thousands of latent fingerprints from being needlessly submitted to the BCA. And so my concern is, I think this bill will very likely shut down the fingerprint operations in St. Cloud, in Duluth, in Mankato, in Moorhead. And those fingerprint cases and those examinations will be piled onto the BCA. The BCA, which already has a wait time, in some instances, of over 18 months. So I think this bill is not, the timeline is not well thought out. There is not assistance to these local agencies that are going to have to pursue accreditation. This is an unfunded mandate onto law enforcement. It'll be about $50,000 to $75,000 to go through the process of accreditation per law enforcement agency. That's one cop. That's one cop off the streets in each one of those departments. So I have a concern about it. I think the intent is right. I think the final goal is right. I think this is too accelerated, and I think there's some unintended consequences when you look at some of the other sections. With that, I urge a red vote.
Any further discussion? Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the genesis for this bill occurred in 2012. And for those of you who may remember, a member of the Senate held a press conference about my city, St. Paul. This was in November of 2012. I would note also that the mistakes that were exposed in the St. Paul Crime Lab were done so by enterprising attorneys, defense attorneys, one of whom I went to law school with. So I called her and talked to her about the issues that they ran into. I would note that this bill proposes to ensure that labs statewide comply with basic scientific standards. Okay, so I objected initially when this bill was proposed last session. Some members may recall that, because I was not satisfied that it did do what they wanted to do. And I frankly put the brakes on it in my committee until I was satisfied. But Representative Zerwas, I don't think I ever heard from you throughout that process, and I didn't hear from a lot of other members of this body. There were not people who testified in opposition to the bill in the multiple committees that it traveled through. But it took a lot of time for me to come around and support this. I objected initially because the bill sets forth standards that are outsourced standards. And it's my contention that as a policymaking body, the legislature, we should be setting the standards to which law enforcement complies when determining which kind of evidence is going to be adequate for our labs. Admission of evidence in court is a completely different deal. The judge, him or herself, has to decide whether foundation has been met, whereby the jury is going to see this evidence. And so what we're doing is we're restricting the bottleneck by saying, okay, that evidence that's going to be considered by the judge and the attorneys for foundational purposes further has to pass through a lab that has met the basic scientific standards. So I understand what you're saying, Representative Zerwas, but I would say that there has been well over a year and a half of time with which to discuss this. My substantial objections to the bill were satisfied, including Senator Latz's submission to me of a laundry list of other commissions, accrediting bodies and standardization bodies that the legislature has outsourced its policy-making authority to which I objected. But this bill certainly fits within those parameters. I do not think it should be met with the kind of objections that have been raised here today. And I was raising the primary objections for about a year and a half. So with that, I'd ask members to vote green.
Representative Zerwas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lesh, thank you for your work on this bill. I know you've worked on it. I had a bill that I spoke to you about and spoke to your committee administrator about as far as trying to get a hearing that talked about re-upping the Forensic Laboratory Accreditation Board and hoping that the Forensic Laboratory Accreditation Board could have provided guidance for accreditation in crime labs across the state. I spoke with you about that bill. I spoke to your committee administrator about that bill. I didn't get a hearing on that bill. And so that is what it is. We're going this direction. I think there is a better way to approach this situation than to have an arbitrary timeline that impacts unfairly and I think out of whack impacts these smaller departments, I think unintentionally, but impacts these smaller departments, while the reason we're talking about this, the St. Paul Crime Lab, is being given an extension. I mean, that's the crazy part, guys. That's what's wild, is the main reason we're talking about this bill, the mistakes of the St. Paul Crime Lab, and now we're impacting every lab across the state, and then we're circling back and giving St. Paul extra time. That's crazy talk.
Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Rosenthal, thank you for bringing the bill forward. I'm going to support it and give it my vote today. If it was mine, naturally, I would have done some things different, timeline and a few things, but I think Representative Rosenthal and others did the best that they could do. I think the paramount importance here is evidence used against citizens, and we've got to make sure that it's exact and not tainted. And I think this bill goes a long way to do that and keep our defendants safe in their civil rights and not have evidence jumping around from everywhere that could be bad. So I would gladly give it my green vote. I wish there were little changes we could have made. And then just before I came in today, I talked to a representative of the Sheriff's Association, and they said they liked the bill. And they've been watching it all along. If there was something in there that would harm the work of their deputies or cripple them or be too much of expense, they would have voiced that opinion, I think. So I'd encourage a green vote, even if you have some reservations. Thank you.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I also like what this bill is trying to do, but I think, members, we really need to look at if it's good legislation, what is the justification for exempting a location or a county or a city, etc.? So I can support the intent, I can support the bill, but I just have a bad feeling in my stomach every time we say it's a great piece of legislation, but it's not good for this or that jurisdiction.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rosenthal, as I understand, I've been listening to the discussion. It sounds like St. Paul was found with bad evidence. Their particular lab was in a particular court case, as I understand. How many different crime labs are there in Minnesota, and where are they? I know that Representative Zerwas outlined 4 or 5 of them. And have any of them ever come under kind of similar scrutiny through the courts? Has there been any recognition of bad evidence coming out of any of the other crime labs in the history of their existence?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Drazkowski, I cannot speak to the history of their existence. However, this bill, there are 4 accredited crime labs, as I stated in my opening, in the state right now. 2 in the BCA, one which is here in St. Paul, the other which has been Brainerd, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department, and the Hennepin County Police Department. As far as unfunded mandates, the application fee is $500. There's $500 to $200 to $2,500. I think it's in all of our best interests that we get the best results from our testing that we possibly can get. This bill does not specifically say that St. Paul is the only place that can work towards accreditation with an extended time period. It clearly says that if you are in process of getting accredited, you can apply for the extension. So, to me, if you're working towards it, you get to apply for the extension. The Department of Public Safety said there's no cost to this bill. And we've had no opposition, and I thank Representative Cornish for getting up and recognizing the Sheriff's Association and the multiple law enforcement agencies that I've worked with over the interim to try and get this bill in the best shape we can.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Rosenthal. Well, I'm looking at the language in the bill, and again, it seems like we have 2 different standards here. We have a standard for St. Paul, and the St. Paul lab gets a 3-year hiatus. Or they've been on hiatus and they get a 3 years to become accredited, specifically in the bill. Now, I've been looking at the rest of the bill, and I don't see that particular language. Maybe you can point it out to us in further discussion, Representative Rosenthal, exactly how how those other labs, if they are in process. And even if they are in process, that is not equivalent to what the specific language for St. Paul is offered in the bill. And as I understand it, we've got 8 or 10 or more crime labs like this throughout greater Minnesota. So here we have 2 standards, one for St. Paul. In greater Minnesota, you get to pay $50,000 or $75,000 in an unfunded mandate that will be paid for by the taxpayers. And Representative Rosenthal, I heard what you said about their registration fees, but the staff time for the people to go through the accreditation in these laboratories is going to have to be paid for by the people in those jurisdictions. This is an unfunded mandate. It is a property tax increase on the people in those jurisdictions in Rochester and Moorhead and Duluth and other places if they want to continue to keep their crime lab. Why do we have 2 separate standards? Greater Minnesota, you get to follow the law to a higher standard, and guess what? There's a special carve-out here for St. Paul. I continue to get the feeling, members, that this legislature is mostly about Minneapolis and St. Paul versus the rest of the state of Minnesota. And it is characterized very clearly, members, in this bill that has 2 standards, one for St. Paul and one for everybody else. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I just want to rise in support of Representative Rosenthal's bill. One thing that we're not taking into consideration or discussing today is the court costs for staff that are on overtime dealing with evidentiary issues or anything that they can that a defense attorney can try to argue in court. So this is a big deal to get closer, one step closer to making sure that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and it's time for that to happen in our labs in Minnesota too. So thank you, Representative Rosenthal. I'll be a green vote today.
Representative Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just got off the phone with the St. Cloud Assistant Police Chiefs, and we chatted about this. And their concerns are what Representative Zerwas has been saying. It's the time frame. When you're talking a cost to the department, they don't have in their budget right now the monies to do the accreditation. So they do need time. So if we're going to give time to St. Paul, we also should extend it to the rest of our communities. St. Cloud has a new facility, and they're trying to get their crime lab up and going. Maybe I should write this down, huh? But they need time to get a new lab up and going, and they also need the time to allow in their budgets the monies to do so. So at this time, I cannot support it. They do need more time, not only for to get everything in place, but also to get the monies in the budget. Thank you.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Tice, I didn't hear which departments you had talked to. If you could say that, that'd be great.
Representative Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. St. Cloud Area Police Department.
Representative Russo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I first saw this story in the newspaper about the issues with the St. Paul Crime Lab, I was shocked and amazed and appalled and every other word I could think of for that. I've got a history of working in labs that had to be accredited. As a society, we're willing to pay a few pennies on a box of Cheerios so that the labs can meet the requirements of the FDA. When we buy an aspirin, we're willing to pay, millions of a cent, who knows what it comes down to for one aspirin, for the whole process that goes into accrediting those labs. I would think we would be willing to do the same before we decide whether we're going to lock somebody up for life or impose large fines on them, and it goes both ways. If we have the accredited lab, we've got the evidence trail, we've got the training, we've got the documentation, we've got the proper procedures, we've got the clean lab, and all of that goes with it, and it goes both ways, whether what you're worried about is wrongfully convicting someone who's innocent or letting somebody go who's guilty. And to me, this seems like a no-brainer. We need to do this, and we need to get it done. It's been too many years already. Please vote yes.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Uroso yield to a question?
She will. Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Uruso, since you've worked in labs and you understand the accreditation process, you have a couple short little, one short little question. I understand the accreditation for the education process as my son's school went through that, and it took multiple years. In this bill, these labs have a limited amount of time to get this done. As in line on line 2.26, it says no lab may operate after July 1st, 2015 unless they're accredited. Can you rough guess how long a proper accreditation process works for these laboratories? Because they have to do the policies, they have to do all the testing, they have to set everything up. Besides the application process and the timelines to do all this stuff, does it take a year, year and a half, 2 years to do the accreditation process?
Representative Uruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I were the manager of a lab, I would have been taking a look at those procedures from the day that story broke. It would have been absolutely irresponsible not to do so. And you wouldn't know what form this final bill was going to take, but it's been pretty obvious that it should be coming down the road. And no, I don't have an exact estimate because I'm not familiar with the particular accrediting bodies that are going to be used. However, it's not been a mystery that this was going to be pushed for. There's been talk about it for a number of years. People have been working on this bill for a number of years. And a lot of those procedures are the kinds of things you could have started to get your ducks in a row the day that story broke.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I believe it's going to take at least a minimum of 1 year for the labs to get set up. It's going to be very difficult for all these labs to get set up by July 1st of next year. Representative Uruso said these labs should be set up. But we have a carve-out for St. Paul. They get an extra 3 years. They were the problem that we had to start this because they didn't follow rules and procedures. But they get 3 extra years. Now, without these labs being able to operate after 2015, except for 4 labs and maybe a 5th one that will be accredited by that time, because it takes time to do this. It takes a lot of time. Our court system is going to be jammed up big time because of the tight timelines that we have in here, except for St. Paul. They get to still operate. But we have these small communities that, because of the delays, and some of them got started because of the delays caused by St. Paul lab jamming up BCA and not being able to get information back. It took sometimes over 6 months to get evidence back for simple weighing and testing of any narcotics. And the people charged of these crimes demanded a speedy trial. And it made it very difficult for the court systems to operate. And defense attorneys learned about the jam up and were demanding speedy trials, and it just was a nightmare for our court systems. Some people probably got off on it because they could not get the speedy trial because of the delays caused by the St. Paul lab. Now, with these carve-outs for St. Paul, they get the extra time, but all these other labs do not. It's going to jam up the system. This accreditation program is very important. It's very important that the labs are properly set up, properly tested, and that the evidence is properly done to a national standard that's set up everywhere, so if a case would actually end up going into appellate court through this federal court system, the evidence will stand up in the court system. I am going to vote for this because I think that is the important part, but I'm really concerned with these timelines in here. It's going to affect our court systems again and do the exact opposite of what this bill was meant to do as far as relieving our court system.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Rosenthal would yield to a couple of questions, please.
He will. Representative Fabian.
Representative Rosenthal, I'm curious about the special treatment or the carve-out that's being granted to St. Paul. Why is this happening in this bill?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, St. Paul was a failure. Their crime lab did not do the job. They let guilty people go. All other labs in the state have been doing a great job. So we don't want to demean our other labs throughout the state. What we're doing here is, and this bill has been in the works for a while, there's actually 1 year left for St. Paul to get accredited. But you're right, originally there was 3 years, and that was because they were a tainted lab, giving bad information, letting bad actors go free.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if that's the case in St. Paul, and you said that the other crime labs around the state have been doing very good work, I'm paraphrasing, what problem are we trying to correct in Moorhead and places like that?
Representative Rosenthal will yield. Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, we all want the best for our justice system. Our police officers are out there doing their best every day. There are certain standards that we need to hold in place in order to be credible. I've worked very closely with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and the intent of the bill is to get us all on a plane where we have complete confidence in the evidence, and that we don't let people free who should not go free.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Rosenthal will continue to yield, please.
He will, Representative Fabian.
Thank you. Well, it kind of goes back to what Representative Russo was talking about, cleaning up the mess, and I just don't see where we're cleaning up a mess in these other crime labs. A question I do have is, how long does it take to go through the accreditation process?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, I'm not sure exactly. I think it depends on the lab. These labs are already doing work, and if they're working towards the accreditation or if their work is already at that standard, not a long time. If they have to start from scratch, it could be as long as 18 months.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If he would continue to yield, please.
He will, Representative Fabian.
Thank you. Well, what happens on July 1st of 2015 if the crime lab in Moorhead is not accredited?
Representative Rosenthal.
They can still continue to operate as an unaccredited lab. A lot of these samples get shipped to the BCA for further examination because they have more extensive equipment and certifications. But as to the Moorhead lab in particular, I can't speak to.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the bill, it says, though, on 2.26, I believe, it says that they will not be, they will cease to operate. So now, all of a sudden, the unintended consequences of this bill have become very serious. And you said, Representative Rosenthal, that it could take up to 18 months. I assume this bill is going to get passed today. I'm not sure when it's going to be signed, but the effective date is July 1 of 2015. And now, all of a sudden, we're going to shut down the crime lab in Moorhead. Mr. Speaker, if Representative Rosenthal would yield, please.
He will yield. Representative
Is it your intention, Representative Rosenthal, that we close down the crime lab in Moorhead if they're not accredited by July 1 of 2015?
Representative Rosenthal.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Fabian, no, that is not the intent. I assume the crime lab in Moorhead is doing a good job and is already working in these fields. And if they are, they can get an extension to continue with the accreditation process.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Rosenthal will continue to yield.
He will. Representative Fabian.
And Representative Rosenthal, what is the process for the extension?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, it's my understanding that you present an application to the Department of Public Safety.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you please point out to me, Mr. Representative Rosenthal, where that is in the bill?
Representative Rosenthal on page 3, line 3.7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for two things. Representative Fabian, on line 3.17, notwithstanding paragraphs upon written request of a laboratory that contains specific reasons for the request, the Commissioner of Public Safety may extend by 1 year the 3 year and 1 year the 3 year and 1 year periods described in paragraphs, which a laboratory must become initially accredited or an accredited in a new discipline.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that doesn't give me a whole lot of comfort because it says the Commissioner may. It doesn't say must. Members, I'm not sure. Listen, I appreciate the intent of this bill. Representative Rosenthal, I sincerely do. We do not want these bad people going off and getting off on technicalities. But I'm not convinced that this bill is ready for prime time. I hope that you will consider throughout the process to make some of these changes that have been addressed here on the House floor. This is a serious, serious matter. And I think that if inadvertently a crime lab all of a sudden stops functioning in one of our rural areas, the unintended consequences of that are extremely significant. And I know there's a lot of people who are willing to work with you to solve some of these issues. I would strongly encourage you to have conversations with the local managers of these different crime labs to make sure that we are not creating a situation that becomes untenable in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Rosenthal.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I really feel that this is a good bill. It obviously, as Representative Fabian has mentioned, has a few questions in it. But this is something that we have to do. We heard this in public safety. I think every lab that deals with this data would want to be accredited, probably is working towards accreditation. And the scientific principles that these labs are going to have to test by under the provisions called out in the bill, the ISO provisions and things like that, will ultimately provide for a much better prosecution and a much tighter chain of evidence. So I think Representative Cornish is correct that this is a good bill and that we should support it. And if there are some problems with accreditation in the future, I think our individual departments can address that. Thank you.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, will Representative Rosenthal yield for a question?
He will. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rosenthal, would you tell me if you have knowledge of any crime lab in the state of Minnesota that is opposing your legislation that they be accredited?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Erdahl, I do not.
Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Rosenthal yield?
He will. Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rosenthal, can those crime labs in the state become accredited on their own without your bill?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Driscollowski. If they comply with the credentials that this bill specifies, yes.
Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Rosenthal would yield one more time.
He will. Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Rosenthal, if your bill was not here today and not even being considered, is there anything anywhere in law or anywhere else prohibiting the St. Cloud, Moorhead, Rochester, or any of these other outstate labs from seeking accreditation on their own? Is there anything prohibiting them from doing it on their own without the oppressive mandate included in your bill?
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Driscollowski, the answer is no, but we want to fix a problem, and the problem is in St. Paul, and what we all are working towards is the best accreditation process we can have, and we want to make sure that people don't go free because of a outcome at a lab that was tainted. And so, yes, it is possible. This bill does make a base for accreditation and gives us something to strive for so we don't have to worry about criminals going on the street free.
Representative Driscollowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Rosenthal. Well, therein lies the problem, Representative Rosenthal, with your bill. The problem is in St. Paul. The St. Paul lab is the lab that needs to have some oversight. Your bill goes out and creates an oppressive mandate for all of the outstate crime labs in Minnesota, when not only could they do it on their own without the oppressive mandate hanging over their head, allowing them the flexibility to find the funding at the time that works for them if they want to do it or if they seek the need to do it. This is just a poorly written bill. The problem is with the St. Paul lab. Why are we putting this oppressive mandate on the rest of the labs in Minnesota where there has not been demonstrated a problem? Does anybody here know of a problem with any of the other labs in the state? I have not heard of any. I've not heard of a single problem identified in St. Cloud, Moorhead, Rochester, Duluth, or any of the other labs mentioned. We don't even know how many labs there are yet. The author didn't know how many there were total. Apparently there's a couple that are accredited or a few that are accredited, but there are a bunch that are not. And this is a mandate placed on them by your bill, Representative Rosenthal. It's being placed on outstate Minnesota. The problem is in St. Paul. Members, let's defeat this bill and let's bring forward a solution that attacks the problem properly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, certain members are making a mountain out of a molehill here. Nobody heard of the problem in St. Paul either until it happened and cases started getting thrown out and people were threatened to be sued. And we're trying to stop that from happening again. As far as outstate police departments, they can still use the BCA because one of the labs doesn't get credited doesn't mean that all forensic science stops. If I had my way, and for the past 12 years I've believed in this and so have other chairs, we wouldn't have these outstate labs, a lot of them. They come and they ask for our taxpayers' money, millions of dollars, and with that comes strings. Everybody today wants their own justice center, their own fire training center, their own police training center, and their own labs. I voted no on police training centers. I think we're getting too many of them. I think it should be in Camp Ripley. I think because the BCA does such a good job, that should be our lab, and that's where people send things to. And if Moorhead or Mankato or anybody has a lab that isn't accredited, by this time they should be shut down. In protection of our citizens that get arrested and the evidence comes forward, it's got to be good evidence. They've all been watching this, all the labs. They know what's going on. They've been working on accreditation already, and it's not going to take that long to get it up to speed. This is a good bill. I would change the St. Paul issue too if it was mine, but we're stuck with this, and it's the best we could do, and I think it's a good bill, what we've got to work with, and I think you can safely vote for it for your citizens. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I've heard a lot of different questions and received some answers. One question that because of these timelines that they have and with the extensions that are offered in this bill for some of these labs, brings up another question I have dealing with the evidence in courts. I'm wondering if Representative Hilstrom would field to a question.
She will. Representative Johnson.
Representative Hilstrom, the question I have, since you are a prosecutor, when this evidence comes to court and one of these labs, because they have not completed their accreditation by July 1st, 2015, and asked for an extension, get an extension granted, is that evidence can be questioned when they come to court of any evidence processed during that extension period?
Representative Hilstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson. Members, at a time when everyone is watching CSI at home, they expect that every single piece of evidence is analyzed through a crime lab in the same way they see it done on TV. If you request a speedy trial demand, if you are in custody and you request a speedy trial demand, the lab at the BCA gives that evidence priority. If it can't be processed in that fashion, that quickly, in many instances, then the defendant will get released pending the trial. But members, one of the things that we know about the analysis and the accreditation is that when evidence has to be admitted at trial, if it isn't accredited, if there are issues, The jury gets to have questions in their mind about whether or not it's valid evidence, and that gets raised all the time. So the timeline on whether or when something gets analyzed isn't as important as by who it's analyzed and what the analysis shows.
Representative Johnson.
Representative Hilstrom, thank you. But it brings a question with the juries that come forward. The labs might do great work. The majority of the work these labs do is outstanding work. But because of the timeline in the accreditation and the granting of an extensions, it's going to raise doubt in some of these jury members, and it's going to create problems in our court systems. Unfortunately, I believe we do need this accreditation. It's very important. But unfortunately, with these timelines, it's going to be very difficult for some of these labs to get their stuff done. And even with the carve-out for St. Paul labs, I have a feeling if they don't get their accreditation done by the 15th like the rest, that any of the evidence they bring forward from their lab is going to be very questionable in the court systems, and their police department might have a tough time with prosecutions.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 115 ayes and 15 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2605. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2605, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the Scrap Dealer and Auto Theft Prevention Act, Act 3, or Act 4, I'm thinking here. What this bill does, just as a little bit of history, it addresses an issue where people are going in and stealing copper and scrap metals from whatever site, whether it's an irrigation site or a car sitting on the street. It implements a transactional record based on the automated property system, which is used in our pawn shops nowadays. And we did all that last year. This particular bill just sets the fee, and it's based on what law enforcement and the developers of the system, the scrap metal dealers, have all agreed to, and it's 72 cents a transaction, and that's whether you're doing 1 pound of scrap or 1,000 pounds of scrap or bigger. It does not have a limit to, you know, if you're doing 10 pounds or whatever. It's just every transaction is considered one, no matter how large or how small. And this bill also involves a grace period. So once it goes into effect and people are learning the software, and as we all know, mistakes get made with new software, so we're not going to charge or get anyone in trouble because they are learning the system. This bill does that, and it changes. Well, Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment to this bill, and we can take it at this time.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Mahoney moving to amend House File 2605, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A3.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what this amendment does is it moves the implementation date back 6 months, so that, well, for the very fact that it's come up about 3 months ago that Michigan is also developing a system, and they want to take another 6 months to look and make sure that the system that we've developed here is as good, I should say is better or as good as the one in Michigan, depending on the cost and the simplicity for the users. So that's what this amendment does, and I'd ask for a yes vote on it, Mr. Speaker.
Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's no other amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2605 as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 113 ayes and 17 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Representative Radinovich, what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of personal privilege.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to recognize former representative, the last representative from Crosby Ironton, Representative Chris Haskamp, is with us today on the floor. She brought with her 4 students from Crosby Ironton High School who are a member of the Capitol Corps class in that area. Representative Haskamp has been leading a civics-related class in the area for all ages, giving them real-life experience in government, and today a group of them are here with us on the Capitol floor, so I just wanted to recognize them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2694. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2694, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2694 is basically the real estate on-session bill. This is mostly a technical bill that was brought forward by the Minnesota Association of Realtors with updates to realtor regulations. Essentially what they did is they worked with Commerce Department during the intern and came up with some on-session ideas, and then they drafted the bill. It's mostly technical, kind of bringing some of the changes in the real estate business into the modern era, because a lot of it's gone computer, as so much of our lives has. I'm not aware of any opposition, and I ask for your support.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2694.
Third reading. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Lillie. Members, this is a good bill. Representative Lillie, thank you for carrying it. A lot of work has gone into it. It is technical. I'm not aware of any opposition. It's a good bill. Please vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day, House File 2854. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2854, the first engrossment, an act relating to commerce.
Representative Atkins.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. There's 183 laws and rules that are proposed in House File 2854 to either be repealed, condensed, or consolidated within the Commerce Unsession Bill. The summary alone is 9 pages long. and that's on legal-sized paper. This may sound like it's not that big of a deal, but quite frankly, many of these laws that are still on the books and have been for 100 years, some of them, simply interfere with legitimate business transactions or stymie potential job growth. A few of the highlights in the bill: current law makes it a misdemeanor for a manager at Cub Foods to sell anything in anything other than one fruit-sized container, or one container for fruit. Another highlight in the bill is that current law it prohibits branch banks. So many of the banks that are operating in Minnesota as branches under existing law, obsolete law, but nonetheless still existing law, might be out of violation with respect to that. Two others: current law governs the sale of insurance policies from vending machines. I'm not sure when the last vending machine sale of an insurance policy was made, but it just doesn't happen anymore. And my personal favorite, and a good segue to Representative Johnson or Chairman Johnson, is we still have a telegraph statute. And I don't know how many members in here remember the last time they've tapped out a telegraph. Representative Nelson, who's now 113 years old, apparently says he's tapped out a telegraph message. But, Mr. Speaker, with that, if it's all right with the body, I'd turn it over to Representative Johnson to do a little walkthrough of the telecom-related items.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Atkins. Regarding telecom, sections 35 through 49 of Article 1 deal with that issue, and essentially it cleans up outdated language in the state's telecom rules. The first Telecom Act passed in 1915, and the last 100 years there's been a lot of incremental changes and interim rules and other policy shifts that have left these old rules and statutes in the books. There are a number of repealers that deal with outdated statutes as well, including, as Chair Atkins referenced, telegraph service regulations, multi-party phone lines, grandfathering of pre-915 contracts, permits for alarms that use tape messages, and so on. The changes in the bill that are contained have the full agreement of the PUC, Department of Commerce, the Minnesota Telecom Alliance, consumer advocates, the CLECs, or the competitive telephone exchanges, and the ILECs, the incumbent local exchange carriers, as well as other telecom interests. And I look for your support on this part of the bill.
There are amendments at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Wills is moving to amend House File 2854, the first engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded A6.
Representative Wills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the A6 amendment is a small little amendment based on a bill that I authored this session that unfortunately wasn't able to get a hearing just with the tightened timeline. And it was brought to me by a constituent, and all the language does is simply clean up the language a little bit in the context of the statute for public adjusters, and removes the requirement that a written notice could be sent by telegram when you're canceling a contract with your public adjuster. So there's still the requirement that you would send written notice, just not by telegram. So I thought, in the spirit of the unsession bill, I wanted to do this for my constituent, and I spoke with the bill's author, and it seemed that he would support the amendment, and so I ask for your support as well. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, Representative Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just speaking in favor of the amendment, but I think it's appropriate that the millennials are taking us out of the horse and buggy era. So I think we should all vote yes.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hortman moving to amend House File 2854, the first engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded A7.
Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the Energy Unsession Bill. The contents of this were originally contained in House File 2834 before we made that into the Energy Omnibus Bill, and we inadvertently deleted the original contents, which were the Energy Unsession items. It repeals unneeded portions of statute and rules. I respectfully request your support.
There's an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Poppy moving to amend the Hortman amendment as follows. The amendment is coded A9.
Representative Poppy withdraws the amendment. Representative, there's another amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Poppy moving to amend the Hortman amendment to House File 2854, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A13.
Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is an amendment that the Department of Commerce, in their interest of trying to take care of redundant language, took care of some redundant language that may not be redundant, and so it does keep the authority to enforce biofuel standards in Minnesota, and this provision is something that the biofuels people are in support of. And so we would ask for support. It just keeps the language as it currently is in law.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Poppy, for bringing this forward. I ask for your support.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. We are now back on the Hortman amendment. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hoppy and others moving to amend the House File 2854, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A10.
Representative Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought you said Representative Poppy. The A10 amendment is a more or less technical amendment, more than less. It is brought to us by the Department of Commerce. There are a bunch of provisions in there from insurance people, from bankers, from the revisor's office. Most of the corrections are technical. Some of these are just agreed upon changes by all the parties involved. I'm not aware of any opposition to the amendment, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
And there is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson S. moving to amend the Hoppy amendment to House File 2854 as follows. The amendment is coded 259.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is also a technical amendment that was brought by the Department of Commerce, and it clarifies one of the telecom section cleanups on setting the 911 fee. It also is without any opposition, and I appreciate your support.
Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. On the Hoppy amendment, any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2854 as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question of parliamentary inquiry.
State your question.
Mr. Speaker, the Representative Atkins mentioned that there were banking laws in here, and Article 4, Section 26 requires a two-thirds vote on banking laws.
I don't believe that that provision relates to the provisions in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of, or excuse me, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Hilstrom votes aye. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Reports from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Rules and Legislative Administration, Murphy E. for the Committee on Rules. Pursuant to Rule 121 and 333, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for today for Friday, April 25th, 2014. Senate file numbers 1732 and House file numbers 2166, 1961, 2531, 3033, 3115, 2365, and 2830.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions and resolutions online and at the front desk. If there's no objection, we'll take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, those motions prevail. Any announcements? Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to announce that GOP members will caucus in our caucus room in 15 minutes, so at 5 minutes after 12.
Any other announcements? Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Thursday, April 24th, 2014.
Representative Murphy moves that when the House adjourn today, it adjourn until 10 a.m. Thursday, April 24th, 2014. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Representative Murphy.
I move that the House do now.
Representative Murphy moves that the House do now adjourn. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Thursday, April 24th, 2014.